Okay, the meme of myself is being weird. Okay, let's do the World War I video. So let's start with the causes of World War I. You can see we've talked about these a little bit. Militarism, the belief that a government should keep up a strong military and be ready to use it. So as countries like France and Germany and Great Britain were coming in the Industrial Revolution, they were making new technologies, building new militaries, and so you had strong military powers in those countries. Alliances, a lot of the countries agreed to help one another, either whether that be starting out just as trade, but then ultimately backing up each one in case of an attack. We'll talk about that in a second. Then you have imperialism, extending a country's power over another country, which we've talked about a bunch. Britain, France, Germany, England, Russia, all were asserting their power over African colonies, this imperialism. They had done that historically in parts of the New World. Nationalism, we talk about this, is a pride in one's country, right? It encourages unity, but it also puts one country against another. So if we look at the causes of World War I, militarism, alliances, imperialism, nationalism, all start with a letter. M-A-I-N, the acronym spells main. These are the main causes of World War I. It works out pretty well for you to be able to remember that. So let's talk about the setup leading up to the war, all right? Tensions were on the rise after the Industrial Revolution because they were gaining more power, more money, building new technologies, growing their economies, building all these cities, and so they started kind of competing with one another. In 1882, alliances started to form in Europe. For kind of one of the first examples of it, Triple Alliance, all right, Italy, Germany, Austria-Hungary, three big countries came together, and the Triple Entente, France, Great Britain, and Russia, and these were kind of the two alliances that had formed after the Industrial Revolution in Europe. So these would support each other, and these would support each other, right? Then tensions start to rise between a country called Serbia and Austria-Hungary, all right? They started to rise, and it eventually led to a Serbian assassinated, when a Serbian assassinated the Archduke Franz Ferdinand, who was the heir to the Austrian-Hungarian throne, right? So a Serbian citizen, assassinated the Archduke, the soon-to-be heir of the throne of Austria-Hungary. So Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia, and as a response to them killing their Archduke, and then Serbia asks for Russia, right, to help them. So we have Austria-Hungary declaring war on Serbia. So Austria-Hungary here, look at these countries. Serbia asks for Russia to help them. Look who comes to support Russia, and boom, World War I. World War I, right? So let's talk about the war. Austria-Hungary and Germany make up the Central Powers. Serbia, Russia, France, and Great Britain make up the Allied Powers. And even those aren't quite the same alliances we talked about. Those are the kind of the main players here. You can also add the Ottoman Empire here as well. So, excuse me, many thought the war would be quick, but it wasn't because of trench warfare. And trench warfare is the style of fighting where soldiers dig these giant trenches, and they can stay in them, and they're not straight, right? They kind of weave through everything. So there were hundreds of miles of these trenches. Excuse me, hundreds of miles of trenches all throughout Europe as they would fight. And so it was very much a stalemate trying to navigate those trenches and defeat the other side. Each side tried to create new weapons in order to gain an advantage over the other one's trenches. So you had the rise of machine guns, poisonous gas, tanks, submarines. These are also known as the German U-boats, right? And the governments, because it was such a stalemate, they had to raise a lot of money on all this stuff. They started to use some of the first forms of propaganda that we're going to see. Radio ads, newspaper articles, cartoons, different things to help either recruit people to come fight, raise money, or rally citizens and just kind of keep the country focused on fighting the war. A lot of this stuff was lies. They would make up stuff about the other country to show that, hey, we, as Great Britain citizens, we have to go defeat Germany because they've done all these terrible things, right? So propaganda was used there. So that's the war. We won't get into the battles here in the video, but so let's jump to the end, all right? So like I said, it was a stalemate for 3 years because of the trench warfare. It was very hard to progress in battles until the USA entered on the Allied power side. We'll save what you learn about the USA's role in World War I for 8th grade. Russia had to pull out of the war, so the US entered and Russia pulled out. They were all on the same side because they had to deal with the Bolshevik revolutions, which we'll talk about in another video. The Central Powers, so Germany and Austria-Hungary, ultimately surrendered, and the war ended on November 11th, 1918, which we now know as Veterans Day. In between disease in the trenches and just kind of that brutal trench warfare, there are a lot of disease in that as well. Deaths of soldiers and civilians. Some people estimate 20+ million people died because of this war, right? Eventually, leaders of the Allied powers signed the Treaty of Versailles, which we talked about when we studied the French Revolution. That's that big kind of city they were in. And it forced Germany to accept responsibility for the war. They had to slash their military. They had to give up their colonies overseas. And they had to pay a lot of money in reparations for the damages that the war caused. And many historians believe that because of the harsh consequences placed on Germany, this kind of growing underseated level of resentment started to circulate in the German country among the German people, and new groups were able to rise to power like the Nazis, and they leveraged that resentment against other European countries to then rise to power. And that's kind of how you got Hitler in power. He was able to take advantage of the resentment in Germany, and that ultimately led to World War II. So even though World War I was supposed to be the war that ended all wars, you can obviously see that it sets up for World War II almost perfectly.